Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about something that I guess kind of flew under the radar. I was kind of celebrating New Year's, and it's this monthly Gacha report that talks about the earnings of games mainly outside of China, but pretty much for the rest of the world. Now at a glance, I'd like to address a couple things. Hoyoverse still remains at the top, which is to be expected, but interestingly, there were actually a couple Gacha games that were near the 20 mil mark, kind of close to Hoyoverse, and that's kind of insane. Now what this means is usually that there was some big event in December, there might have been a Christmas event, a New Year's event, a login check-in event that everyone rewarded from, and so therefore they probably had a spectacular month, which meant more players, and it's the holidays, so there's more time for people to play, you're around your family, and sometimes there's weird in-laws or something, so you're staring at your phone. But long story short, it's probably a good month. Now before I go too much further, let me say that being in the top half of the list that I'm about to show is probably respectable since there are infinite number of games in the market, but this right here is where I kind of stay conflicted. It's EpicSeven's placement. This is probably one of the most confusing things to see on a revenue chart during the holidays for a couple reasons. The first is that one of the ways that you can interpret this is that, wow, well look, compared to a game like Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, or compared to some of the other games on this chart like Arknights, which had a 1.9 mil month as opposed to the 8 mil, EpicSeven did pretty good. They remained where they needed to be, and they got back to 3 million, which is nothing to scoff at. However, the second way that you can interpret this is that it's kind of bad because unlike some of, I guess, the lower half or the non-Hoyoverse gacha games that a lot of people swarm to, this is kind of not a great winter month showing. We had plenty of events, like we had winter characters, we had a bunch of like rewards or hump buffs. In theory, people should be spending on stuff like that, and there were also giveaways, contests, there were streams. There was a lot to get excited about, especially in December for EpicSeven. Now, rather than speculate whether the month was good or bad, or if the content was really even worth gaining revenue from, let's instead actually deep dive into what happened in December. Ludwig. First things first, I think that Ludwig's design was really cool, and when people heard that he had the double soul burn, it was crazy. People loved the animations. He looked like he did a lot of damage, especially in the showcase, and more than anything else, people were really psyched about the whole hit chance and the self-attack buff penetration thing. Now, to be clear, he definitely still is one of the most disturbing high damage characters that you can pick in the game. However, I think people have realized that the gear that you need in order to actually make him good, because most people are running him around the 250 range, is pretty high. And that paired with the fact that he has a crit chance imprint is pretty well. Overall though, despite his high gear score requirements, he is one of the most fun characters I've ever played. There is something kind of special I want to try with him. Maybe I'll make it a video later, maybe I won't, but it's a kind of like super special cleave that I think really works well. Overall though, I think he's plenty fun to play. He's an 8 out of 10 character in my book. Silver-Tide Christie. This character was definitely thought of as weak and bad at first, and I still think a lot of people somehow still think she's bad, but I'll admit, I was pretty guilty of not really understanding how her kit was going to work, and until I saw how good she was at countering characters like Zio, I was kind of on the fence with whether or not this might have been the worst specialty change that we'd ever gotten. That being said, I was also kind of guilty of thinking she was kind of weak, or maybe the kit was misguided. It definitely felt like kind of weird to give her an effectiveness buff, and even right now, you don't really get that much value out of the effectiveness buff. She's pretty much just used to guaranteed not get debuffed by Zio and push the character in the backline. However, at the end of it all, I don't know if it was a balanced thought, or maybe they just kind of realized it would be a little bit crazy, but honestly, if this character had any more to give in her kit, she might be a little bit insane. As it is right now, she already can use Bastion of Hope, which makes it so that she guaranteed pushes the person in the back, since trying to debuff 350 effect resistance without effect resistance, ignore soul burn or something like that, is pretty tough. She also honestly doesn't even really need that much speed if you want to run her on like triple resist set or have her have more HP so she doesn't get one shot. I think that's also pretty solid. All in all, I think the craziest thing is honestly just the fact that you can give attack buff, self-defense buff, also all while giving the backline character 25% CR push. That's a lot. She's not the most exciting character, and even though I kind of like the animations of like, you know, when she has all of her friends like Melanie, I think, and Helen next to her, she's not the most insane character on this list probably. I think she's a 7 out of 10 unit. Now, Biblis was definitely a character that people saw as like maybe average. Her animations were cool. We didn't know if her event was going to come with some kind of like pay to win whale aspect to it, all that jazz. But especially after post buff, I think this character is disgusting and outright a force ban against counter characters. Now the cooldown on her skill 2 is already non-existent since it's one turn, but since the buff now recovers the health of all allies, this plus the removing of souls plus the barrier that you gain from the skill 3 really makes her kind of a threat and really not ignorable. Now obviously there are builds where you can run her tankier or some people run her fast, but I think at least from my testing in arena, which I think is probably where she's going to shine the best, she's pretty good. She's got a decent character kit, and honestly her design is really cute. So between the interesting kit and the well-designed character uniform and all that stuff, I think this is a pretty good character, 7.5 out of 10. Okay, so Blooming Litica is kind of hard to assess because she's not even really available on ladder, which kind of skews her actual potential. But here's what I'll say about the character. Number one, at least from what I've calculated, and again, I've done like hundreds of, I guess, like people talks or kind of explained it on stream a number of times right now, her damage potential is extremely high to one target. But I do admit that this is also a character that kind of needs a decent amount of gear, so you can't just, you know, slam, plug and play and it not make sense. However, as with every high gear requirement but well-performing character, like characters like Faithless Litica, Lua, or Emma Ludwig, etc., this does not mean that they're bad, and they're actually much better than you think. Now, I've also seen comparisons with Blooming Litica to characters like Hwayoung or Lethe, and for Hwayoung, it's because it's an on-command nuke that usually starts at the beginning of the match. However, even at the peak of Hwayoung, you weren't really able to just S3 a target through mitigation and just one-shot it. You kind of had to one-shot the mitigation, so there was a bit of playing around, or there was a bit of thinking to the way that you had to play Hwayoung. But in essence, you needed something to pair with the character, or you had to play around something with the character, and that's kind of the same thing that I kind of feel from Blooming Litica. For Blooming Litica, you definitely do need a character like Lua maybe, or a speed buff in general, maybe with a character like Landy. However, if you do end up opting for something like a debuff route, you can still do a lot of damage with her. PSA, and just a bit of a warning, I'm not trying to say that Blooming Litica is as OP as broken old Hwayoung. However, keep in mind that this is a turn 1 nuke so long as you have speed buff and you're faster than the enemy opponent by like 80 speed. If you're like 250 speed on this Blooming Litica character, ignore the rage set that I have on right now, you one-shot most characters. Now, the other comparison that I heard was that she's similar to Lethe because you also have a nuke, but it's a bit more conditional for Lethe as well. You kind of need to like ramp up a little bit. And there needs to be something said about the people that say that Lethe is easier to build or pick or use. And that's that Lethe needs to have a decent amount of effect resistance and also not get debuffed, all while having enough HP to kill. Being 220, 230 speed on a character like Lethe is not difficult by any means. However, in order to have that level of health and also something like 130 effect resistance so you don't get one shot, it's not as simple as you think it is. Now, to be clear, I don't think there were enough games in general to be done for Blooming Litica to even be considered good or bad. However, I did hear a lot of comments regarding, you know, is she like Hwayoung or is she like Lethe? And the answer is kind of to both, but kind of not really. I truly have never seen a character that has one-shot a Karina through mitigation, and I understand there's element advantage, and I get it, like he had speed buff, but it was just a Landy S3, and there was escort from Arrowell. That is pretty noteworthy and insane, if you ask me. At the end of it all though, it's a question mark out of 10 unit. We'll see how she does in the next season. Bad Cat Armen. Now everyone is pretty much too afraid, I think, to use this character properly right now because it's the end of the season. But her being 115 base speed and also having a 10 speed EE that allows her to strip and provoke kind of makes her guaranteed faster than Conqueror Lilius and Lua, and also kind of a threat. Now, I did do a video where I tested her out and she did look funny, but there definitely needs to be a little bit more testing for this character, especially because she's not as plug and play as a character like Biblis. That being said, provoking and allowing a frontline unit to get crit damage buff and a hit is kind of hilarious regardless of how good or bad the character is. But seriously, I mean, like, listen to that. Doesn't that sound like kind of crazy for a kit? All in all though, definitely not enough testing has been done, and ultimately the kind of gear you'd have to dedicate to her and the kind of playstyle you'd have to play to dedicate to her is just not really something that people can afford right now. At the very minimum though, I think she's a 5 out of 10. Now, Abigail is another character that I've seen pop up a little bit, but I'm not really sure if she's really being tested because again, it's the end of the season and how many times are you really going to find a perfect match for Abigail? Now, to be clear, she's good against teams where someone gets one shot, like maybe against a Strays, but the instances where you actually get to see that as opposed to you just picking someone like Sage Ball, or you just picking a speed threat, or you just picking someone that revives against Strays, it doesn't really make sense to use her that much. So therefore, even with what I consider to be a pretty good EE for her, all things considered, I still can't put her anywhere above a 6 or maybe a 5.5 out of 10. Again, we'll see for next season though. And finally, the last thing that we got in December of 2023 was this new side story. So this is one of the few side stories, of course, that doesn't require energy. So of course there was a gimmick in order to clear it, and you needed to stare at your screen and press everything. But what I did outside of the first 5 stages with all the scrolling and how slow it was and all the weird stuff where they walk around, none of that was pretty good. None of that was very nice. And of course we got it fixed in the second half, so it's not that big a deal. However, now that you can kind of scroll as you wish at like a pretty respectable speed, the moving and the picking up and the carrying of characters is really not that big a deal. At the same time that we got that change though, we did get a real set of stages with like the nighttime mode after week 2. And despite the first 5 stages kind of just being a hand-me-out in terms of getting like rewards from the bosses, floor 10 is pretty tough. Now I understand that stage 10 is probably pretty easy for some of you guys, and probably not as easy depending on what characters you have or if you have the flower upgrades. However, I think in concept, this idea of like removing mechanics from the boss and that being the way to like make the fight easier or complete it, as opposed to finding creative ways to beat the boss, is not even what the creative or like the challenge wanting PvE players want. And to be clear, I'm more than happy to just complete the content, get my reward, and get out. However, I don't think the players that were asking for stuff like Challenge Abyss or people that like hard content were very satisfied with the fact that if you just kind of waited a couple more hours, you could just upgrade one of the flowers and just remove a mechanic entirely. Now, all in all, despite it being free, I would definitely kind of give this event a bit of a lower score, but I do like the chibis, so it is a 7 out of 10. But just to recount, it's an event that you AFK at, which is kind of nice because it doesn't use energy. However, the real like challenge content that, you know, was supposed to appeal to some players was not challenging at all, which is fine for me. But I know that if you are someone that, you know, wants to stimulate your brain a little bit, it probably kind of stinks that you could just override most of the mechanics just by waiting. That being said though, I'm sure a majority of people were just happy to get the rewards, and I'm also one of them. So at the end of the day, it's a 7 out of 10. I like the fact that this like Rudy Tooty thing is here. I like clicking on all the hearts from the waifus. And I also really like the voice lines that happen when you pull up the characters, especially Biblis's. So if we round everything back up, was the 3 million this month justified? Probably, since we didn't get anything really game-changing. And despite other games getting Christmas-related waifus or big holiday events or something like that, we got a spring flower event that by no means is like necessarily bad, but there was no real tie to Christmas. When I logged into EpicSeven, if it weren't for the fact that the lobby was kind of Christmassy, which by the way, most people have illustrations on right now, so they weren't even using it, but EpicSeven gave us a spring flower event that had no real ties to Christmas, so there was no real way for us to feel the Christmas cheer. You want to know how we actually felt the Christmas cheer? A Christmas lobby that most people aren't able to use because they're now using their illustrations and these wonderful 2023 holiday packs. Yes, this was a great way to say Merry Christmas to EpicSeven. All jokes aside, I know we did get the login event and it was kind of nice, but that's not really enough to justify getting people to talk about like a new event. Like maybe there's like a Nier or 2B collab and like she's got a Christmas outfit, or oh my god, this whole Azure Lane thing has like Christmas related waifu skins, like, you know, whatever it is. But again, this is by no means a bad thing, I guess, for EpicSeven. Depending on how you interpret things, we had about another average month. I'd be curious if the game continues in the same pace, because again, Christmas is kind of the time where you'd expect more spending on a gacha game, which you could see from other Hoyoverse titles. But for EpicSeven, maybe our next month will be good or bad, I'm not really sure. However, one thing's for sure, aside from, I guess, Chinese New Year, which may be coming up, I guess, like, I don't even remember what the day is. I think it's sometime in February or January. I have no clue. We don't really have any other major holidays coming up, so unless if we get a collab announced really soon, I don't think that this 3 mil during one of our big revenue months is really a good thing. But anyways, guys, that's going to be it for this, I guess, analysis of 2023 and going into 2024 for EpicSeven. If you enjoyed today's content, make sure to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, subscribe. Let me know what you think about, I guess, the chart, the trends. I'll include the link in the comment section, or I guess maybe in the description for where I found this thing. To be clear, I did not find this information myself. It was just something that was posted on r/Gacha Gaming. I don't think there's any reason for them to lie, and it's just like a census thing. It's like an analytics. Obviously, like I said, it doesn't include the China-based stuff, which you can interpret that how you feel, but you can interpret that however you like. That being said, though, that's basically what I think about, I guess, EpicSeven and its revenue and its choices for 2023. I hope you enjoyed, guys. As always, you can find me on Twitch and YouTube streaming and all my other platforms, YouTube, Discord, TikTok, Twitch, Twitter. I'll see you guys on the next one. Adios. Happy New Year. I think this is when this is probably going to get released. Probably the day after New Year's. Happy New Year. Bye-bye.